Alright, so it's been a while since I made a musket build video, and this video is going to include all of my latest changes adapting to the Season 9 meta, and also some insights in how to play musket, and we're briefly going to cover builds, and there's going to be a decent section on builds themselves. I also want to mention that Season 10 is very close, so I also recommend not spending gold on best in slot for Season 9, but I do have a new system on my website, which we will talk about later. Includes both the pre-best in slot all the way up to best in slot through 4 different build stages. So no matter where you're at in the journey, you have a reference for progression instead of just straight in-game gear. You know what you can use up until then. Now, there's actually been a lot of changes to the builds themselves, but I quickly want to go over some gameplay and sort of the play style behind musket, especially if you're a new player that joined us on PlayStation Plus with the free PS Plus, or you're a new console player, or even a new PC player, or you're tuning in for the first time in a long time of taking a break from the game. How to play musket in New World, especially in Season 9, and the meta has shifted quite significantly. We're currently in a meta where it is melee and haste and mage dependent, where there's a lot of people that will catch up to you and gap close with ease. So it is important to make sure we have a lot of utility going into the current meta, and that's what a lot of my builds emphasize here. And I'm also bringing in some stuff that I actually haven't utilized before, such as the accelerating traps, also with our musket rapier build, switching to full bleed pops, which is really fun. And I can't believe I've slept on the Tondo flourish and finish for that long, because especially in the current meta, you're gonna need those burst pops where you can actually build up bleed stacks pretty easily in the current meta, because people seem to ignore it and waste their cleanses on other stuff. So it is actually quite significant, especially in this meta again where people are very tanky and fast. You need a high damage, rotation set of abilities and such. It is also important to mention that positioning, as always, is going to be one of the key things as a musket player, especially if you're new to the game. Knowing when to take a fight, knowing when to, pull back, and knowing what you can play with and engage with. So one of the most important things is knowing when to basically, I would say, get close, and knowing when to stay distant. In a clip I'm going to show you on screen, you can see that I go in for this kill, but this is actually something that is really bad that I still do sometimes, and it's called greed. Greed is the idea that you're going to get a kill that could go horribly wrong, and I still do this sometimes. A lot of people, even good players, will still do this because, you want the kill, right? And this is an important learning or stepping stone, is knowing when you should and shouldn't go in. As you can see, when I went into the fort here and I bleed popped this player, while it did get me the kill, I almost died, and there was an overwhelming amount of players on the point that it probably wasn't a good idea and I shouldn't have gone for this play. But because I had that greed mentality, I decided to go in. So it's about figuring out what you should and shouldn't be doing, especially in this, again, meta where we're very squishy. Any musket, even 150 con musket, you will die in 2 to 3 hits from most builds. Crescent Wave knocks about a 30 health, and that's with a pretty optimized kit that I have myself. Before we get into the rest of the video, I want to talk about boot.dev, the sponsor of today's video. The legends over at boot.dev have created an immersive online learning platform where you can learn how to code, but with the fun of an RPG-like progression system, such as leveling, questing, and earning achievements, with the ultimate goal of teaching you valuable skills on back-end development from start to finish. Not only does it have all of these fantastic features, it also has a brand new training grounds mode where you can grind out infinite challenges and even personalize them like a roguelike, which I find incredibly cool. You also have leaderboards if you're competitively inclined like me, and beyond all the fun and progression to be had, you are learning some of the most valued skills in the industry where you can earn a lot of money. If you're interested, head to boot.dev and use my code MAILOREO to get 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan. You can also scan the QR code. Once again, thank you to boot.dev. Now, most of my builds are going to be running 100 to 50 con, even lower in some areas. For max DPS, I actually recommend 25 con usually, but If you're a newer player, I think 50 to 70 con is the sweet spot, especially if you're learning. As a musket, we have the pleasure of keeping distance and firing high damage bursts, right? So there's no real need to be close unless we want to be. So that is just something I quickly want to preference. And then I quickly want to go over some of the more basics of musket, especially if you're brand new to the game. Musket itself is a dex and intelligence scaling weapon. A lot of you probably already know this. If you're brand new to the game, your damage is going to scale purely off dex and int. And all the build I'm currently running, we'll talk about all the builds later in the video. But I just quickly want to go over some of the basics, especially some combo related stuff. Now, this musketry here, this is one of the main musketries I've probably been running for the longest time now. Is the most consistent, has the best utility, and I just in general feel the most comfortable with this setup. And I quickly want to talk about the combos. So especially if you're a long-time player of the game, you probably already know about this, but this is for my newer players. Powder burn should always be your initiation shot. There is no other time you should be using powder burn other than engaging. The reason why is because powder burn obviously applies ignition, which is a burn, and you also get to deal more damage to that burning target that you hit with powder burn. This is where our second part of the combo comes in, power shot. We overload our musket with gunpowder, and it causes it to deal 160% weapon damage. So we're initiating with powder burn, we're following up with power shot, and to make the combo really fast and tie it all together, we're using a passive on the right side of the tree called Tactical Reload, which dodging allows us to reload. This happens once every 6 seconds, which is perfect for our combo. This is the ideal setup for initiation in any musket engagement. You want to make sure you're hitting these shots, as this is your crucial component to proccing your damage, especially getting your ultimate, which is your lethal combo. Musket debuffs increase your damage by 17%. Of course, we have ignition, which is our, powder burn debuff. So it is important to know that we get more damage provided they're burning, which is sort of a key component here. Now, there are 2 other ways we actually proc this debuff status and get more damage. That is another passive called Shell Shock. Shell Shock gives weaken to the enemy if we hit them in their head for 4 seconds. So this will also allow us on follow-up shots to get more damage through lethal combo. And then traps, if we have someone in our trap, that is also going to apply rend to that player. So 20% rend for 3 seconds. There you go. So we have 3 ways of using lethal combo and getting more damage, and that's going to be our sort of initiator. Traps are going to be purely reserved for mobility through accelerating traps and for, general, escaping and CC control on the target. It could be a healer, for example. Traps are going to be there in reserve. You don't want to force out traps and waste them for no reason. I see some people throwing traps down on point for no reason or at a door. Don't do that. Think of traps as a more in the moment, you need to get out kind of situation. So that's quickly what I wanted to talk about, is how the synergies in the tree work and things like that. Now, when it comes to Rapier, this is the Rapier tree I've currently been running. This focuses heavily on the bleed playstyle, which is honestly something I slept on for a long time, and I'm very excited to say that this is my new favorite current Rapier tree setup. Is just the idea of building up these stacks and getting that bleed pop with flourish and finish is fantastic. Now, if you're new to the game and you don't know how this works, every time you use Tondo, it is going to apply a 10% bleed to the enemy, right? And it is important to note that you can apply this bleed multiple times to the enemy, and when you do it, it is going to build up for a combo with the flourish and finish. So if we hit an enemy, the same enemy, 3 times with Tondo, it applies 3 different bleeds, and then we use our flourish and finish ability, and we hit them with the finish. That is the second part of the animation here. I'll quickly put Rapier on a showcase. So the second part of the animation, you go like this. That sort of jab motion right there, we hit them on the enemy when they have 3 bleed stacks. That is going to initiate a huge bleed pop, as I call it. It does a massive amount of damage because of this left side ultimate bloody end. Finish, which is the end of flourish and finish, deals 150% of the Rapier's bleed damage instead of only 110%. And this obviously is yielded and increased by Tondos. So as you can see, Finish lunges forward, dealing 120% direct weapon damage, and consumes all rapier bleeds on target hit, dealing 110%. And then again, that becomes buffed with this, and it also gets buffed with the finisher artifact. This is going to be, of course, mandatory for the bleed build. So Deadly Flourish. Flourish is the first part, deals more damage, which is always nice. Now, Finish is always going to be the highest damage dealer, but again, this is sort of how the build works. And then you also have Keen Tondo, which is actually kind of useful for this build, plus 26% critical chance against targets affected by Tondo's bleed, meaning that we are going to be proccing that Tondo and getting more crit chance, which is really, really nice for our bleed pops. So this is sort of how the whole synergy of the build works. Now we can get into the gear. Now the gear is going to be pretty different, especially if you've been around for a long time. Season 9 has made me change up quite a few things. After settling in and coming back to the game and figuring things out, I feel like I've fleshed out a musket kit that I feel comfortable with, and especially in the current meta with a lot of haste. Sorry for hitting my mic there. So I'm quickly going to switch over to my website here. Now, if you don't know, I have a website that has all of my builds on it. It'll be in the description below. And I've done a big overhaul on my website recently, and I feel like it's got a much better flow through. It's much easier to sort of get the information from. So, for example, we want a PvP build, we can go to PvP, we can go to musket now. Now, I quickly also want to mention there's only 2 musket builds that are actually updated for Season 9 on here. That is because the rest of the builds I wouldn't want you to invest in anyways. This is a disclaimer. Don't invest in off-meta builds this close to Season 10. If I haven't said that, so Season 10 is coming out in about 40 days. I think even maybe less than 40 days, 35 days now. Actually, no, we're about a month away. A month away from Season 10. I wouldn't recommend investing gold into any best in slot, and I wouldn't recommend investing gold into any off-meta build unless you already have it. So the main 2 builds, the main 2 DPS, the best 2 musket builds are the only ones that I've updated for this video, because these are the ones that you might want to invest in like a 2-perk setup for, so you can at least learn it for the next month until Season 10, and, you know, sort of learn the playstyle, learn the mechanics of how to play musket. So I'm going to click on Musket Rapier, specifically the bleed build for this one, and you can see I've got this new look to my website, where we have effectively just got embeds from New World Buddy. Thanks to New World Buddy, fantastic website. I'm able to pull really, really quick gear sets from there over to my website, and allows me to have more builds. It also allows me to update things quicker, and it allows me to have this new thing called, or new setup where I have a range of different builds. So I now have 4 stages of builds for every build going forward on my website. So when the other pages get updated in Season 10, they will follow a similar structure to Musket Rapier and Musket Lifetaker. Of course, these being the first 2 updated, now have 4 different stages. Of course, don't invest in the best in slot stuff this close to Season 10, but budget beginner and minimum competitive, you could invest in up until Season 10 to sort of learn the build. So I quickly want to go over how the website works and the changes to the build. So obviously we have the budget beginner doubloon gear. So in the free-for-all island, we'll quickly jump back into the game. In the free-for-all island, if you're new to the game, you can get doubloons from the free-for-all island, bottom left here. There's a currency you can take to the Well of Fortune and Cutlass Keys. So if we scroll in here, they haven't updated on the map. I think it's like right here. The Well of Fortune is going to allow you to get gear that is up to 725. It ranges from, I think, 710 gear score to 725. You will get RNG perks, but it will have a bit more of a bias towards PvP stuff. And this is really good for some sort of entry beginner PvP gear. So as you can see, the way the website works, by the way, is that with these embed panels, you can obviously jump out straight to the website, or you can just simply scrub right with your cursor, so, or on phone. It works great on phone. It simply collapses them into a vertical list. So again, you can simply drag left and right, see all of the breakdown stats. Now, this is something really cool that New World Buddy has. You can see all the different ways we get things. So for example, I believe blue in the attributes is gear. I think, oh no, blue might be, I think red is magnify. Yellow is level, purple is food, and yeah, blue is gear, I believe. So really cool that you get all these breakdowns of how things work, your health, your weight, your damage, your output. all on New World Buddy with these embeds. It gives me a lot more statistics to show to you guys, and again, make changes faster. So scrubbing right on the beginner set, you can see it even shows us our Empower Cap. Now, Empower Cap is something I quickly want to mention because this is a very important concept in New World, especially if you're new to the game. Empower is a pretty complicated system that I feel like New World could simplify, but in short, Empower in New World is a system where you get bonus damage for perks that are under a category called Empower. There is an Empower cap, and Empower is capped at 50%. Now, if you're wondering what actually gives you Empower, that's what I want to quickly talk about. So on the musket tree, there are quite a few different sources of Empower. So you have Empowering Headshot, that is 10% Empower. We don't use that in this build. We also don't use this one here, which is the Initial Engagement. There's another 10% Empower. We also have Heightened Precision. This is stacks of Empower. Then we have on the right side Empowering Weakness, another source of Empower. Those are the 4 main musketry Empowers, which add up to, I think, was it 30%, which is, you know, quite a decent amount. Might be a little bit more than that. Might be like, from memory, it might be 35%. 40%. Might be 40%. But the important thing to remember is that these are all conditionals, and you're not always going to have these Empowers up. That's why I opt out of certain ones. And on gear itself, your Empowers can be Runeglasses. So I use sighted Runeglasses. I will talk about that in a little bit. I have switched to sighted. Sighted Runeglasses give me 1% additional Empower. I also have a new perk that you can now put on armor. This is one of the biggest changes to DPS for musket, is Mortal Power replacing Harnessing. Now this is a conditional. You have to get a kill to proc this, but it lasts quite a long time. So upon picking up your first kill, you have quite a consistent source of Empower. And as long as you're keeping up momentum, this is going to be a very nice perk to have. I've added that to the Silken Cocoon. This is a best in slot item. You probably might not have this yourself. Again, the range of different builds for different budgets are on the website, so you can see the lower tiers that you can get and what you can fill in until you get best in slot. And again, but with that close to season 10, don't invest in gear like this unless you have an excess of gold. So Mortal Power is also Empowerment. This is a 12% Empower. Sighted is 1%, and Sighted is on all of our gear. We also have damage on our ring. This is also 7.8% Empower. So that is also another important thing to mention. And then we have Empowering Toast on our earring. There's another 10% Empower. So currently, through all the different sources of empowerment I have on my build, I have 5 sighted Runeglasses, which is 5% Empower. I have Mortal Power, which is another 12%. That's 17% total now. And then we have the ring, which is 7.8%. Now, this is only on the split damage of our musket. If you didn't know, we split our damage to Elemental with our Abyssal Gem. That is still 7.8%. It does not half. That is not part of the math here. So there's 7.8% onto our 17%. Now that brings us to what? 24.8%, I believe. No, 23.8%. So at 23.8%, we then have Empowering Toast, so we're at 33. 34. Yeah, 33. It is 33. No, I'm mathing out here. It's 24% or 34%. We're just going to round it to 34. It's a little bit easier. Or 35, sorry. So we're at 35% in power now. So as you can see, all these sources add up. And if you're ever confused, my embeds and the external links that go straight to New World Buddy will simply tally all of the sources of Empower for you right here. So you can see we've also got Honing Stone. That's one I forgot to mention. Honing Stone is another 7% Empower. Heightened Precision added up 6 stacks. So if you're wondering how Heightened Precision works, by the way, it's actually really... This is one of the probably easiest conditionals to build up as musket. Simply passing between shots is literally going to increase your damage. So you basically just hit targets as much as you can, you know, momentum. The more you hit, the more damage you get is pretty much how this perk works. So it's really nice. And Empowering Weakness, hitting a target with a debuff, this is pretty much always uptime now. Everyone has a debuff on them at some point now, and you probably could be one of your own debuffs as well. So yeah, that's important to mention. So again, we have all these different sources of Empower, Empowering Toast, Mortal Power, Empowering Weakness, and Honing Stone, Heightened Precision. We also have the the extra damage on our ring. So, you know, we overshoot our empower by a tiny bit, which is fine. We overshoot by 4.2% on the beginner kit. And again, it's important to remember, these are conditionals. You might not always have uptime on things like Empowering Toast, require you to drink in a mana pot every now and again. So this is a perk that I have on the Endless Thirst. I really like this perk. It's pretty easy to have uptime on. You simply drink a mana pot, and now you have 10 seconds or 8 seconds of Empower, and that's going to have about 50% uptime. Remembering to proc that is actually going to be the hardest thing, so getting that muscle memory in to proc that mana pot before you do an engagement. So there's all these small technical elements that you'll pick up on as you play as well. I also want to make sure I mention them in this video. So popping your mana pots with the Empowering Toast on Endless Thirst is pretty important. You can also see all of your cooldowns in here, all of the perk stacks, again, all of the sighted Runeglasses here. So you have the trees too, so these are the exact same as the ones I just showed you in game a little bit before. Same with the raid, the Bleed Pop Rapier. Now the gear, again, the Gold Curse gear, I'm simply recommending you with 2 perks, Accelerating Traps and Elemental Aversion. The Accelerating Traps caught a pretty sizable nerf in Season 9, but it is still going to be, in my opinion, an essential perk for utility. When everyone else has haste, you need anything. It makes a difference no matter how small it is, including Zephyr Cakes and Outpost Rush. If you've played Outpost Rush, you have the shop where you can use the Azoth currency you get in the game mode. That's going to give you another, I believe, 7% haste, which is extremely important. So, on with the gear, again, Accelerating Traps, Elemental Aversion. Now, Elemental Aversion is, in my opinion, better than Enchanted Ward, purely because it works against abilities. And there is a lot of heavy-hitting abilities in this meta that deal magic damage. Firestaff does a lot of damage to a squishy musket player. And, you know, things like Crescent Wave, this helps with Crescent Wave, which is really nice. So that is why I prefer Elemental Aversion, but I don't want to say that Enchanted Ward is bad. They're both good, and ideally, you might even want to go for a 2-and-2 setup where you have 2 Elemental Aversion on your gear and 2 Enchanted Ward. I believe that might be what I recommend in the budget set. I can't quite remember. We have our chest. Again, this is just 2 perk budget gear. Vital Synergy is, again, a new perk that I think is quite useful. While your health is below 50%, gain 15% stamina regen rate. Stacking this with Nimble and our Earring, that means while we're below 50% HP, we have 25% increased stamina regen rate, which is really nice in those clutch situations where you're getting hit a lot, where you're quite low HP, and you need that sort of utility and, you know, defensive capabilities to recoup, right? So that is really nice. You get a little bit of healing if you have a healer. So yeah. Over to our gloves, Crippling Powder Burn. Of course, it's going to be, you know, a pretty essential perk to musket. That slow is a lot of utility. That's going to help you a lot, especially in engagements. 1v1s, my duelists out there, this is a perfect pickup. Again, if you're an experienced player, you might already know a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. Trying to do this in as much of an approachable new player way as possible, because I feel that is very important to me to break down how exactly everything works. So again, jumping over to the Attuned Leather Pants now, I quickly want to preface, Attuned Leather Pants, in my opinion, is still one of the best musket artifacts alongside the Winged Leather Shoes. I quickly want to mention that, and sorry for hitting my mic there, Winged Leather Shoes, if it loads here, sometimes Neural Buddy can be a little bit slower to load, but it's because there's a lot of information on it. We'll actually quickly switch over to things. I don't think this is loaded yet. So yeah, we'll just quickly switch over to here. There's another artifact that does a very, very similar thing to the Attuned Leather Pants, and that is the Winged Leather Shoes. The Winged Leather Shoes effectively increase our haste duration, which is quite nice, by 50%, but it also means we deal 10% more base damage while hasted. Now, this is effectively the exact same stat difference as Attuned Leather Pants. Is, you know, maybe a 1% difference or so, but the amount of damage increase compared to Attuned Leather Pants, which is just a raw stat bonus, it is very, very similar. So I think both are great for their own reasons, and you can sort of work either or into your own build. So I've left that up for open interpretation in this video. I stick with Attuned Leather Pants because it's not only that, it's also easy to get, it's new player friendly. Attuned Leather Pants simply unlocks at the end of the Elysian Wilds questline, while the Winged Leather Shoes are a little bit harder to get as they come from a boss that has a lot of HP, and if you don't have a group, if you're a solo player, this might be a little bit more tricky to get. And again, they both pretty much do the exact same amount of damage increase. Now you also have, I believe it's the crown, the old crown or something like that, is the new artifact they added. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, this is another option, but it's also, it doesn't really do anything different from Attune Leather Pants. You actually get a little bit less stats as well. As you can see, this gives you 36 magnify, while the Attune Leather Pants gives you 45. So you get a little bit less stats out of Old Crown. But what I will recommend Old Crown for is it's fantastic for other builds that you might want for, you know, doing the same sort of, like a different kind of musket setup, for example, or maybe you use this for your bow setup with harnessing on it. So there's nice that we have another artifact that does the same thing as Attune Leather Pants, so you can use it for different builds. But I still think Attune Leather Pants is the best and easiest to get. So again, Attune Leather Pants is what I use through and through. Does the same thing as those other two as I mentioned. And yeah, that's the easiest to get. Jumping on to the jewelry for beginners, I recommend just again 2 perkers with refreshing recovery over stamina recovery. Sorry. Now, if you don't know, stamina recovery copped a pretty big nerf, I think maybe a couple seasons ago now, I can't exactly remember, where it only gives you bonus 40% stamina. So, stamina recovery here, yeah. Stamina recovery at 725 only gives you 40 stamina, which is almost enough for 1 dodge. I think one dodge is what, 45 in light now, so yeah, it's not that great. Or it might even be 50 for it. It is 50 for a dodge now, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not as great as it used to be. It used to be, I think, 90 stamina, something crazy like that. Was pretty strong, to be fair. Getting almost 2 extra dodges out of it. But that is why I swapped to refreshing recovery, because refreshing recovery allows us to get all of our active ability cooldowns reset. This, in my opinion, is much, much stronger, as it's going to give us all of our utility back. It will give us our traps back. It will give us evade back. It will give us flourish and finish back. And in my opinion, that has much more utility and use than 40 stam. So stam management is going to be very important still, nonetheless. But refreshing recovery, I think you're going to get a lot more out of this when it comes to utility. So that's why I've switched to that. Now, for best in slot kits, you're actually going to be going for both, but at a budget level, you don't have the golden resources to have both, of course. So that is why we've just opted for a refreshing recovery. For the ring, we've opted for hardy and thrust damage. Now, why I've gone for thrust damage, it's important to mention that we split our damage with muskets, the most beneficial way to deal damage. The reason, and the pure reason I've gone for thrust damage here, is because the Apex Gold Curse jewelry can't get elemental damage types on them. You can only get thrust slash and keen and what's it called? Strike. You can only get those 4. You can't get any elemental modifiers on the Gold Curse gear. I would like to see that added, AGS. But as of right now, your best bet as a budget is thrust damage. Of course, you could go on the trade post. You get an elemental damage type, which is quite important. For the earring, we've opted for Empowering Toast and Nimble. I think those are the 2 most crucial earring perks. And then for the musket, the pre-best in slot musket is going to be the Syncretic Musket. If you've played and watched me for a long time, you already know about this. Syncretic is the OG and still is the golden standard when it comes to entry-level gear. You get Keenly Jagged, you get a Boreal Attunement, and you can slap Disdain Infliction on it, which in my opinion is still one of the best perks for musket. I know a lot of people have been switching out for like Pen the Empowered or Sundering Stacks. I think Pen the Empowered could be an okay perk to replace Disdain with, but I definitely wouldn't recommend Sundering Stacks after its nerf. But Disdain Infliction is still fantastic. It's still going to be great even after its nerf where it got a little bit longer of a cooldown, which is fine. It's fine. So the second thing I want to mention here is we're splitting our damage to Arboreal. Now, why I chose Arboreal over any other element is because it is the least resisted against the element. There's no weapon in the game that does nature damage by itself, so there's no reason for a healer to run specifically elemental or nature damage resistance, sorry. Of course, healers, players, everyone's going to run elemental resistance in this elemental damage meta. We have Fire Staff, Void Blade, and Crescent Wave. Everyone's running Opals and Elemental Aversion. Don't get me wrong there, but no one's specifically going to nature, which is why it's my best pick, especially over Void, which I used to do back in Season 7. Jumping onto the Rapier, or sorry, the Finisher, which we went with the Stained Infliction as well, is purely for PvE sake, as it does well in PvP and PvE. It's a bit of a multi-faceted approach. The thing with the Stained is it could be replaced with either Pin the Empowered, or you could replace it with the, what is it called? Rogue or Penetrating Backstab, sorry. If you want a little bit more DPS exclusively for PvP. It's important to mention that the Finisher is a fantastic rapier in pretty much every aspect of the game. So if you're running a bleed build in PvE, you probably want to Stained. But in PvP, it could work pretty well opting for Pin the Empowered or Pin the Empowered or Pin Backstab. So yeah, that's something I quickly want to mention here. And for Heart Rune, I've got Stalwart Heart Rune of Stone Form. You need that utility in the current meta. You could also use Dark Scent. I've seen that getting used recently. So that could be a viable option too. And of course, if you want a little bit more DPS, you can go for Brutal Heart Rune of Cannon Blast. So again, that is all the same structure through all of the different kits. The min competitive Hive of Raid gear. This uses Hive of Gorgons gear pretty much exclusively, other than a couple pieces. So it has all of the same approaches. We're using the Hoplite mask. We've added accelerating traps to that. So this set we get max refreshing out of, which is quite nice. Refreshing is really good in the current meta where you want your utility up quicker. So it is beneficial to have that. Preferably, I would replace refreshing with shirking heals in the current meta, which is something new I've added into my builds from Season 7. Shirking heals in the current meta is, in my opinion, a must at the in-game level. And that is only going to come in when you get to the expensive stuff, because it is quite a hard roll to get both your damage decrease, your sustain, which would be shirking heals, and your weapon perks. Quite a hard roll, quite an expensive roll. So that is an investment, and I wouldn't recommend investing in it until Season 10, and we see what the changes are. So again, Hoplite Mask, Hoplite Shirt with Vital Synergy added on. Now, you're probably wondering why is Silken Cocoon not here. Silken Cocoon is a lot harder to get than the Hive of Gorgons gear, so I've left it towards the best DPS gear setup. Now, you could, obviously, that's going to be, progression for you, so I'll swipe right on the, that is something that's annoying, is you'll accidentally highlight some of my builds. So we'll just go over to New World Buddy here. And that's another fantastic thing. You just hit the orange button, you go straight over to New World Buddy. You can import it to your own collection, so you have easy reference for progression too. So Silken Cocoon is a fantastic chest piece that comes from the Worm Raid, the 20-man Worm Raid Sandworm, which is a lot harder to get, as again, it might be hard for you to get a group, especially if you're a solo. So, of course, this is going to be a harder to obtain named item, which is why I've left it out of the Hive of Gorgons set, as I feel at this point, Hive of Gorgons is a much more easy feat than the Hive of than Shah Neshen is. So I've left that sort of in the upper tier. So that was just a choice I made. And again, if you have it, you have it. So Hoplite Shirt, we have the Hoplite hand covers with Crippling Powder Burn. And then we have Aeternum the Pants, of course, the Mortal Power on it. The reason why I put Mortal Power on the Aeternum the Pants, by the way, is so it's more universal for all of my different builds. That is entirely up to you in what order you put named perks on your named gear, as long as you have, all of the utility perks, like Crippling Powder Burn, like Vital, like, Accelerating Traps. As long as you have it all, you're good to go. Hoplite Shoes, we put Omnidirectional Evade on it. This is kind of optional nowadays. Omnidirectional Evade isn't really used for DPS. Especially in our bleed pop build, it's going to be a lot less prioritized. So Omnidirectional Evade is kind of just optional bonus damage. I decided to put it in because we could squeeze it in. And then for the amulet, we're going with the Corrupt Progenitor. Now, the reason why I went with the Corrupt Progenitor, while it caps out at 700 gear score, you can't put this to 725. It has got the easiest route to the perks that I would recommend for it, which is Health, Refreshing Recovery, and Flame Protection. It comes with Health and Refreshing Recovery. Then you can slap either Stam Recovery or a Protection on it. I went with a Protection, especially in the current meta where fire does a lot of damage. That is sort of what I prefer. Again, this is much easier to obtain. I think you just farm like a few mobs or something like that. So we can open it up. This is another cool feature. You can hit the New World Buddy link, take you to New World Buddy, and then you can actually go down to the Corrupt Progenitor. You can click on it, Oh, I think you can click on it. Oh, you might not be able to click on it, but you could just take the name, paste it in here, and it's going to come up, and then you can learn where to get it on the right side over here. So if you've never used Neural Buddy before, this is a great tool. So you'll go over here and you can see dropped by. And it's dropped by all of these mobs, and you can find out where they are even by clicking on them. So the Taker, you can see it where it is on this map, and you know exactly where to farm that boss and try and get a corrupt project in it. So there's one of the coolest systems of Neural Buddy, and you know, major props to them. Fantastic website. Has a lot of utility that my website doesn't have, and that's why I like to lead over to it. And it's great that I've implemented it into my website now. It just makes everything much easier. You can also click straight on the perks as well, and you can see the sheets in here. So that is another thing that I want to mention. Now, this is of course going to be the raid set. So this is where we start to get the Hoplite ring, which has bloodletting on it, and then you have hardy and nature damage. So you can finally add out elemental damage type. Bloodletting isn't the most ideal third perk for a ring, but it's also not the worst. It's kind of a mid perk. We will get onto the best ring and the best DPS gear setup. And if you're starting to notice a trend here, we're not using harnessing anymore, and we're also using sighted rune glass. And the best part about using sighted rune glass now over a specific elemental rune glass case and over the harnessing is that we have a more universal gear set for different musket builds. It's much better for musket aconite, which is useful for nature damage. It's much better for musket Lifetaker. Musket Lifetaker literally has a couple changes away from this build. So there's a multi-use build that I've designed that also min-maxes DPS, utility, and you know, defenses and utility, right? This was an idea that I wanted to come up with where you can use it for everything and it works at the top tier for everything. There's it's a consistent build that is also really strong, which was important to me. Endless Thirst, of course, going to be our earring, same as pretty much all of the kits in my musket builds. Endless Thirst giving you just much stronger healing potions. Yeah, Empowering Toast. Fortifying Toast is okay. We don't really have much armor as a light musket anyways, so it's yay or nay. And then we have Nimble, of course. Jumping over to the best in the slot, of course, this is where you start to see a lot of the more crafted stuff with Gorgonite Inductors. A lot more expensive. We start to see the introduction of Shirking Heals, which is a pretty big gear gap, but that's not to say you can't compete without Shirking Heals. I don't have Shirking Heals myself, and as you'll see in the gameplay that I showed either at the start or the end of the video, I don't know where I'll put it yet, I do not have Shirking Heals, but it would make a massive difference, but it's to go to show that you don't need it. You do have to play a little bit differently without Shirking Heals. You have to play a little bit more defensively, but Shirking Heals is pretty much a crutch perk if you like playing hyper aggressive, which was why I included it in my current kit, especially in the current meta. Any kind of self-sustain, such as Shirking Heals, which is very insane, stacking it, is going to be incredibly useful in the current meta. So we have Accelerating Traps, Elemental Aversion, my preference of defensive perk, and Shirking Heals. Of course, we're running the Sighted as well on the Gorgonite Mask. We have the Silken Cocoon, of course, comes from the Worm Raid, a really hard but really good named item to get. You get Shirking Energy on the chest, fantastic. You get a little bit of stamina every time you successfully dodge someone's attack. Then you get Keen, which is an impossible perk to put on the armor in general, so that gives you crit chance, which is fantastic for musket. And then you get, of course, I added on Shirking Heals again. You could also add a defensive perk. It's entirely up to you if you want to go shirking or defensive. I went shirking, so we have a little bit more self-sustain instead of a little bit more defensive on our hit. Gorgonite hand covers, Enchanted Ward, Crippling Powder, and Shirking Heals. Pretty much a god roll. Expensive is the general term for this kit. 500k to 1 mil plus gold. That's something I quickly want to preface. This is a very, very expensive kit. This is in no means obtainable for a lot of people. Min competitive hide gear, this is what I pretty much have myself, as I haven't invested this much gold into my musket builds. So min competitive hide raid gear is the minimum you need to compete at a high level in PvP in this game. Best DPS gear, this is if you're, someone that has a lot of gold, earns a lot of gold, gets a lot of gold, it's going to be unobtainable for a lot of people, but if it is obtainable for you, It's going to make maybe a 5 to 10% difference over min competitive. You know, I'm not going to lie and sit down and lie. There isn't a gear difference. There absolutely is a gear difference. And again, I'd say it's maybe a 5 to 10%, maybe even 12% gear difference between min competitive and fully best in the slot. Budget compared to min Hive, I would say that's also probably maybe a 10% difference, 10 to 15% difference. But it's an MMO, right? So as much as I hate that there's a gear difference, it is a core concept of an MMO that better gear does better things. But maybe the extreme amount of shirking heals is a little bit debatable. You could, of course, maybe even just go for a 2-perk shirking heal setup, but it is up to you. So the problem with the 2-perk shirking heal setup is you need your weapon util perks, which means you would be entirely stripping out things like Enchanted Wood. It's up to you. So, you know, we have our Aeternum the Pants, of course. We have the Dune Plantula. This is another Worm Raid gear piece that has an illegal perk combination, Enchanted Wood and Elemental Aversion, which is insanely strong. It is the only piece in the game that has that illegal perk combo that can go to 725. You, of course, have the Frigid Dawn set, but that is capped at 700 gear score, which means you get, I think, 4 less stats and a little bit less elemental and physical armor resistance, making this much, much stronger. And I think this is easily one of the best pieces in the kit. You can put Omnidirectional Evade or another Shocking Heals on it. It is entirely up to you. Now, there is a 4th kit in my Musket Rapier setup, and the Musket Lifetaker also has a 4th kit. And this is for my duelist friends out there, my people that prefer dueling, playing arenas, and playing hyper-aggressive. If you prefer that playstyle over max DPS, then this is the kit for you. This uses Featherweight and Shirking Heals and Frigid Dawn, so we're becoming ultra tanky, ultra self-sustainable, allowing us to be a constant source of pressure with our Rapier up close. And this works fantastic with the Bleed Pop setup if you know what you're doing and you understand how to position properly. Of course, you're still going to be squishy, but you're going to be a lot tankier than my DPS setups. I would say the duelist setup is probably maybe 20% tankier, if not a little bit more than that, than these kits here. Now, it is important to mention that this is going to do a lot less DPS, however. You're probably going to do maybe a 10 to 15, maybe even 20% less damage than these musket kits here. That is because you don't have, you know, your wing leather shoes or a tune leather pants, right? The tune leather pants makes up for a significant damage increase over other musket builds because you get the 25 strength passive, which is 5% more to your basic attacks, and you also get, of course, all the extra stats, which yield around 10% more damage. That right there is 15% in itself that you will not get through the duelist setup, but duelist setup is great for sustainability. Of course, Frigid Dawn helmet, Enchanted Board Elemental Aversion Shocking Heals. Featherweight. This is fantastic. This is, again, going to allow us to have a much higher elemental physical setup. And we can even see that stat here. This is another fantastic thing thanks to New World Buddy. If we go to the first panel here, we can see exactly how much armor we have, physical and elemental. We have almost 1500 on both. Meanwhile, our other kits, we can compare it to the other best in slot kit here. I think it might be around 1000. Oh, it's done that thing again. Let me quickly flick back over. We might need to quickly refresh. There's probably something I will release a hotfix for, is the highlighting when you're trying to swipe. It works actually a lot better on mobile, because mobile, it doesn't like randomly select things or highlight things. And if that's annoying, you can always just go over to the external New World Buddy link as well. I'm sorry if I'm yapping on a bit here. There's a lot of information I'm trying to crunch into this video because I find it's very important to the entire thing. So that was something I felt like, as much as this is me yapping, it's important information. So as we can see here, 1100 armor on the best in slot DPS, 1500 on the, almost 1500 on the duelist, which is almost a, 400 difference, I think. So you're getting a lot more armor out of this setup over here. And compared to something like the beginner setup, you're losing a lot of armor in comparison. Again, this is a best in slot set, so, you know. You have the featherweight, you have the Frigid, or sorry, the Gorgonite hand covers with shocking heals. You have the Gorgonite leggings, the shocking heals, enchantable and mortal and power water roll. And then you have the Sandline Tarsus. This is another worm piece that we can put into a musket kit thanks to the featherweight armor piece. This is going to be fantastic for utility when you're playing hyper aggressive and you need to get the fuck out. This is going to be clutch for you. You're going to have a constant source of extra 15% haste, 7 seconds on a 7-second cooldown, which means as long as you're hitting targets, you're going to have haste. Stacking that with Zephyr Cakes, you get 21%, pretty much 21% perma haste as long as you're shooting shit, which is extremely strong, especially for a duelist setup. This is the perfect setup for you. Again, shirking heals on that. Freedom is whatever. That came with the Sandline Tarsus. You can't change that. Gorgonite Amulet, Stam Recovery, Refreshing Recovery, Flame Protection. Dropped health because we want the utility and self-sustain. If we get below 50%, give us that extra stamina. I would rather that over a little bit more health. Personally, it is up to me. But you can also go for health over stam recovery. It's entirely up to you. Refreshing recovery, in my opinion, is way too damn strong to drop, especially with a musket rapier hyper utility, hyper aggressive setup. You probably want to have your cooldowns if you get below 50%. Gorgonite ring. This ring is actually the same. I think we forgot to show the jewelry for the best DPS kit. Again, you can check out all this stuff for yourself. Our website link will be in the description. I also want to mention, this is going to be a random jump in here, my Firefox users. For some reason, Firefox blocks all of my scripts. It doesn't show these neural buddy embeds at all, which kind of sucks. So you want to use these buttons and externally go to neural buddy. So I'm sorry if you're a Firefox user, you just have to externally go over to neural buddy with these buttons. If you're not a Firefox user, pretty much every other browser is fine, by the way. Any Chromium browser, Safari, all of that. Mobile browsers work perfectly fine with the embeds. I just don't know why Firefox doesn't agree. But yeah, Gorgonite ring here, Invigorated Punishment, Hardy and Nature Damage, a God tier God tier ring roll. Invigorated Punishment doesn't count as Empower, just gives us more damage. Fantastic. Then we of course have the Endless Thirst, then the Hoplite Musket. If I don't go over it already, Hoplite Musket is what is introduced in the Hive Raid gear. Literally the 725 equivalent of the Syncretic Musket, which is fantastic. Probably still best in slot in my opinion. Again, some people prefer Penny Empowered over Disdained Infliction. It is entirely up to you. I prefer having stronger dots over a little bit more burst. It is personal preference, right? It is personal preference. And then we of course have the finisher with Pin Backstab on it this time. Just showcasing a different option that you can go for over the Disdained Infliction. If you do a little bit of PVE and you're a bleed player in PVE, you might prefer Disdained. If you're a PvP player, you might prefer Pin Backstab for a higher burst. Especially if you get a bleed pop with Pin Backstab. Ooh, there's a nice amount of extra damage. Again, we're running Stone Form here. You could go for Cannon Blast as well. So that is pretty much all of the build stuff. I kind of went a little bit long on the build stuff than I was intending to. That made it into a bit of a yapology video. I'm sorry about that. There's just a lot of important information that I felt like I wanted to get into this video, and especially convey if you're a newer player. It may still seem overwhelming, and if that's the case, don't be afraid to join my Discord, or if I'm live, I usually go live around 12 a.m. PDT on Twitch, weekdays. I don't do weekends anymore because I was getting burnt out for a little bit. But join my Discord, head to my Twitch streams. If you ever have a question, I'm always happy to answer when I'm not around on like Twitch or YouTube. Discord is the best place to find me. And with that said, I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk about. Don't invest in best in slot if you are just getting into musket. That's obviously out of the question. If you want to mention that, don't go near 3 and 4. Just don't. That is completely off limits. Save your gold to season 10. This is purely just here so you can see what I recommend. Or if you already have it, or if you're close to already having it, Beginner and min competitive Hive Raid gear, that's all you need until season 9. I've been using min competitive Hive Raid gear for probably 8 months now, and it's been serving me well. I've been able to compete really well with it, as you can see in the highlights. So that is all I want to mention. Also, if you want to figure out how to get to other pages, you click the icon on the top right and it brings up the nav. little bit hidden, but I think it's kind of neat. You can go PvP, you can backtrack, go Musket, then we can go to Musket Lifetaker. There's also received the same beauty treatment as the Musket Rapier setup. Anyways, that is where I want to leave the video at. I'm starting to get a little bit of a scratch in my throat because I think I've been talking too much and yapping too much. I appreciate you guys tuning into the video. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. And I will see you guys in the next video. Cannot wait for Season 10. Peace out.